The question looming over this conference, obviously, is what to do about Russia. And I think that Admiral Bauer is perhaps one of the best placed people to answer that. And he has done that extensively in this book that is in front of us. His distinguished career has prepared him to write this book. He's been the commanding officer on ships in the Royal Netherlands Navy. He's grappled with pirates off the coasts of Somalia. He was the overall commander of the Dutch Armed Forces. And from 2021 until January of this year, he was the chair of the NATO Military Committee and thus the alliance's highest ranking military officer. He's also a TikTok star, I understand.
Not actively, but...
Not active, which actually may be pertinent to some of the things we will be talking about. But his experience being the top-ranking NATO military officer at the time when Russia launched its full-scale Ukraine means that he has special insights in how we can prepare to be ready for the Russian threat, to deter them, and if necessary, to resist them. The book is organized, that is put forward here, is organized to lay out 7 principles. We don't have time in this 20-minute little talk to talk about all of them. There are 4 that are kind of self-explanatory. Expect the unexpected, think like an investor, take responsibility and trust the professional, obviously. That's what we will be doing here. But we'll focus on 3 of them in this talk. And I'll start with the first one. Admiral Bauer, you say one of your principles is choose effectiveness over efficiency. And I read that, and then I think about all these stories that, as a journalist, we love these kind of little tasty tidbits about waste in the military, you know, there's very expensive toilet bowls and things like that. How do you reconcile these 2 things of saying we have to be effective and efficiency maybe isn't that important, but then you'll have people saying, but aren't you just wasting money?
Yeah. To start off with, I think it's important why the topics in the book are what they are. Okay. Because basically, after all these years in the military and the change, the overhaul of all the strategies and the military plans, basically, the brunt of the work now is not in the military thinking anymore, but it is in the execution of those plans. That's one. And to make it a success, we need much more than the military. And the book is basically about a whole of society approach. We need, you know, the companies, we need the financial sector, we need the government in a wider sense than just the Ministry of Defense. We need the individual citizen. In terms of understanding, they all play a role in our security. That's why we wrote the book, Eleonora, Russell and I wrote the book together. And so that is the reason why I wrote the book. It's not a military book, it's a book about basically a call for help from the whole society to do more. So that's to start off with. I think we have had a hyper focus on efficiency for too long. And I remember as a chief of defense that people would say, you want to have more toys for the boys. When we were talking about frigates and submarines and tanks and all the things that an armed forces need. Now, then I tried to explain, and the reason was that we did counter-drug operations in the Caribbean, and we did counter-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden, and so why do we have these expensive frigates? And I said, you know, you can do shopping with a Formula One car, maybe not a lot, but you can do shopping with a Formula One car, but you can't race with a normal car. And so if there is no war, you can do other things with expensive military equipment. But if there is a war, you can't change a normal car into a tank. So that's sort of and I think more and more people start to understand that. Now, efficiency for a good reason has been chosen, let's say 40, 50 years ago, as one of the holy grails in our thinking. The government is spending as little as possible, and companies keep the costs as low as possible. And that is not bad per se, but we have sort of forgotten to think what the consequences of that efficiency can be. And we have reached points in the armed forces, but I think in our society as a whole, where there is so many single points of failure because of efficiency, that we actually have become extremely vulnerable. And to give you an example, when I was Chief of Defense, I was told by the Chief of the Army 2 weeks into the job that the forces, the Dutch forces that were supposed to be ready on the 1st of I became CHOD in October 2017. So I heard from the Chief of the Army, we cannot provide the forces on the 1st of January for the EU battle groups. I said, why not? And it's nice to hear that end of October. And he said, well, it was many problems, but one of the problems was the fact that the medical equipment and the medical goods for those forces was not available. I said, why is it not available? He said, well, we're not allowed to buy it. I said, why are we not allowed to buy it? And who says so? Well, the Ministry of Finance says we're not allowed to buy those packages. I said, why not? Because, well, there is a date on the bottom of all these packages that is closer by than the end of the deployment. So then we have to throw it away, and then we have to buy a new one, and even that one we have to throw away if we're not using it. And because it's very unlikely we're going to use it, so that's why we're not allowed to buy it. So we're not ready. And I said, okay, so if I decide now to buy it, when will it be available? He said, 3 months. Okay. So I went to my colleagues in the EU Military Committee and told them this, that we're not ready because of this. And I thought they would be extremely disappointed and angry with me. And they sort of looked like, that's interesting. But when coffee break came, they came all to me and said, it's fascinating because we have exactly the same problem, but you're the first one that actually is open about it.
This is interesting because it reminds me of the discussions we had during the pandemic, which basically the same problems, where you have very right-on-time supply chains and things sourced all over the place, and you don't have reserves, and all of a sudden you find out that you don't have enough masks.
Yeah, so efficiency has led to this idea of just enough, just in time.
Yeah.
So that's a different problem from what I described.
Yeah.
And just enough, just in time is fine. If you order a car, you basically know from the dealer that your car is going to be delivered in the 3rd quarter of 2026. And that's the car with the leather seats and the open roof, etc. And so if you want to buy a car that is available earlier, you can go to another brand. You can go to another dealer, and hopefully they have one available. But in the defense market, there is no alternative. There is one manufacturer of Patriot. So there is no market. Yeah. And we treated that as a market as well, but there is no market. There's one customer, which is the government. And then the government is an unreliable client over in the last 30, 40 years. So there is a lot of issues there. But just in time, just enough means that if there's a peak demand signal, like in COVID, and the same for a war, then the industry is unable to respond.
The second issue is be ready to deal with risk. And I understand this is why you got on TikTok, because you were asked, how people should prepare for an emergency situation, and your answer was viewed by 33 million people?
2.5 million. I heard that from my sons.
Yeah, okay. So, but you have an interesting point there where you say that we should, by recognizing risk, we actually decrease it. And I think there's a great fear among politicians and amongst opinion leaders. If you name the risk, you're going to scare people. You're going to lead them into a panic. How do you find the balance between those two things?
Yeah, I fully disagree. I think by sort of trying to hide under the covers and hope everything will go by, we are in a time where that is not a responsible reaction. So I think we have to make sure that people actually understand what the risks are. Of course, you have to mitigate as much as possible of those risks. It would be stupid not to. But the fact that we live in societies nowadays where everybody sort of thinks every risk can be brought back to zero. And that's nonsense. Especially in a war, that's nonsense. And so we have had this issue in the armed forces in peacetime very, very much, where we sort of have to prepare people for a situation where the armed forces have to take risk because you don't know everything in a conflict. You don't know where the enemy is necessarily. You don't know how much ammunition they have. You don't know whether they have a new weapon overnight. You don't know a lot of things. And still, the fight is there tomorrow morning. Even if you don't have ammunition anymore, you can't call up the enemy and say, hey, we have to produce a stash of ammunition, and I will call back to restart or continue the war when I am ready again. That's not how it works. So we have to teach our military that you have to be able to deal with risk whilst, for example, in training in peacetime, politicians do not accept if somebody dies, for example, in a training incident. I'm not saying we should aim for that. That's not the point. But things can happen. Things can go wrong. And we're all angry nowadays if your mobile phone is not working, if there's no electricity, if there's no water. Even if it rains in Spain when you're on holiday, we're angry. And I think we should stop doing that. There is risk. And we have to recognize it. We have to mitigate it as much as possible. And then there is a residual risk, and you have to talk about it. And the best situation is where someone takes responsibility for taking that risk.
Mm-hmm. And the third point that actually is connected to this, you said we're all angry these days. Partly that's because we're all sitting on our phones, on social media, that separates us from other people, but stokes our emotions, makes us more individualistic. And one of your major points, and I think this is incredibly important, is about how Ukrainian society came together in the face of the threat and formed and said, we are fighting this, not just we individually. But in the West, maybe this sense of we has, I wouldn't say evaporated, but it's been dissipated. How do we get back to that? Because without that, clearly, we cannot stand up to the Russian threat.
Yeah, so everybody talks about my rights and my privacy and my happiness, and everything is about me. Now, I don't know whether anyone in the room thinks they have any privacy. Is there anyone who thinks there is privacy? Yes? Well, Google knows you're here, and actually you gave them permission to know that. But if the government says, can I look in your phone? We have a revolution. And so we have given away everything, and at the same time, if the government asks, we are angry. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's not bad per se that we talk about my rights and etc. But we forget that a society is not the sum of all the individuals. It's more than that. And if we, and I've tried this many times, a room with 600-700 people, and I ask who wants more security, and all the hands go up. And then I say, so can you imagine you will become part of the solution? And so people say, what? Part of the solution? What do you mean? So what, we have 60,000 professional soldiers. We have outsourced everything in the 90s. We've outsourced security to our armed forces. And so someone else will solve my problem. Whether it's security, whether it is healthcare, everything is someone else will solve my problem. And so the 70,000 soldiers we start the war with, unfortunately, after a couple of days, soldiers get wounded and soldiers die. And then where do you think those new soldiers come from? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are part of the solution. And then people sort of are shocked. No, that's the armed forces. They do that. Yeah. Do you think we have a stash of people somewhere that is outside our society? It is our problem. And, one of the things, I know part-time working is great, and we are the champion of part-time workers in Europe. But we might have to work harder. And so people say, it's a right. No, it's not a right. It's a luxury in a way. So if you talk to a guy in Ukraine who builds guns, he said to me, we get 240 hours out of an employee, 20 days per month, 12 hours per day. Well, in Europe, it's 160 or less. And we're angry for the fact that healthcare is not ideal, and we have a mother or a grandfather or a nephew who's in the hospital and nobody's taking care of him or her. And we're angry about that. And the government should solve this problem. They've calculated that if the people that work part-time in healthcare work 5% more, the personnel problem in healthcare is over. So instead of saying someone else solves my problem, we can solve it.
We are quickly coming up to our temporal limits for this little talk, but I wanted to ask you a question which is very closely tied to the theme of your book, but that's very much on the minds of people, I think in Latvia, I think all over Europe. We're seeing, as we heard on the last panel discussion, an increase, a ramping up of Russian cyber hybrid attacks. And the way, I mean, these are not only disturbing in and of themselves, but they are also weaponized to decrease trust in governments, in armed forces, because they say, look, the Russians are hitting us, we're not hitting back, we're weak, we can't respond. What do you think, taking into account the lessons of your book, of what you've learned in NATO, how should we be responding to these cyber attacks, both in terms of substance, but also in terms of communication?
Yeah. Hello? Yeah. I did 4 interviews yesterday, 2 for television, 1 for radio, and 1 for a newspaper. I don't know whether you read it or saw it, but this question was very much up front in every interview. So first and foremost, the fact that we responded as an alliance to the drones attack in Poland is extremely important. The fact that it wasn't the Poles alone, but it was an Italian AWACS, it was a German a Patriot missile battery, and it was Dutch F-35s, and of course the Poles themselves, and then even Dutch F-35s shot down together with the Poles a number of the drones. Now we can have a discussion on how effective that was, and we need to become better at that. But the fact that there was a response, including physical kinetic response, is for me worth gold. And then, of course, the controllers, the people of the efficiency, they say, you know, how it's ridiculous to shoot with a missile of 600,000 euros, a drone of 20,000 euros. That's ridiculous. Well, it's not the smartest way, I will agree, but if that's what you have, you will use that to kill what the threat is. So we have to become better at that. But the fact there was a response, that was extremely important, and that it actually was a NATO response. So I was in Poland on television, and they said exactly, yeah, you are leaving us alone. I said, what do you mean we are leaving you alone? We had your back. The Dutch, the Italians, and the Germans, we were there with you. What do you mean leaving you alone? So, I mean, so that's one. Second, then people say, yeah, but yeah, we didn't shoot down everything. So, for example, in Denmark. So the drone was there. Yeah, the Danish Air Force didn't do anything. What makes you say that? Well, they didn't shoot it down. Well, does that mean they didn't do anything? By the way, it was on purpose they didn't shoot it down. It was a choice not to shoot it down. They saw it. They were able to track it. They knew everything about it. They actually assessed it was not a threat. Very important, because we can shoot down everything, and people can think that a drone attack or that drones that infringe your airspace is a military attack, but actually it wasn't so far. The assessment across the alliance is this is not the start of a military confrontation with Russia. It isn't. It's a nuisance. It's irritating. It's not good. So the most important thing is we have to make sure we detect it, we follow it, and if we want, we can shoot it down. That's first and foremost a decision of the government of that nation, not NATO, because the nations are still responsible for their own airspace. And so the Poles did it with the help of the Netherlands. That required changing of laws, by the way, because in many nations across the eastern flank they had to change laws, including the constitution, to allow the military to do anything in peacetime. Because in the early 90s, a lot of the nations changed their laws to make sure the military was unable to interfere in any way during peacetime. So in Romania, they had to change the laws. In Poland, they had to change the laws for Rzeszów, the little airfield in the eastern part to make sure that was defended. So the fact that Dutch F-35s were able to shoot down drones over Poland is a huge change, in accordance with the law as well. So there's a lot of things happening. We responded. We didn't overreact. We did respond. And even if a nation decides not to shoot it down, it doesn't mean they didn't do anything. So people, please stay calm and carry on. Because in a way, there is no immediate threat. And we have to be vigilant. We have to check every day whether that stays that way. So I'm not predicting anything for the future. But the incident so far was not the start of a military conflict with Russia. So please support your government. Please have trust in your armed forces. Please have trust in NATO, because we are here and we have your back.
Great. That's an excellent place to finish up this conversation. A call to calm. I think that's something that we all need right now. Thank you very much, Admiral.
And a call, if I may.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I'm sorry.
I may.
But then a call to action
If
as
I
well.
Eleanor and I brought some copies. So outside the room, we are going to sell books. If you're interested, bring your phone to pay, and then you can buy a copy. I'm in business now, ladies and gentlemen, so the time of free work is over after 44 years in the armed forces.
And I can heartily recommend the book. It's very, very interesting and inspiring. Thank you very much, Admiral.